Hello, Ryan here, and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all of the news from the week just past. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get on with it. This week, we hear more regarding underground facilities and investigation missions. Evocati testing of 318 starts up again, plus we get an update on the Gen 12 renderer completion. So Inside Star Citizen was back after its 3-week hiatus, and to kick off this quarter, we checked in on the current progress of the revamped underground facilities, which we heard about during this year's CitizenCon. So after the concept phase, they thought about what each facility will be, how much time the players will spend there, what we will be doing there, how many of them there are, and what their themes are. Now, the approach that they like to take is to get it into the editor as soon as possible so that they can get feedback on what they're doing and playing the location as a complete location to a degree, as this really helps with making better decisions on what they're trying to make. Now, the developer did show off a tool that they use to internally track all the progress on these underground facilities, seeing what is done and what is left to do to take these facilities to Tier 0, Tier 1, Tier 2 and through to completion, with Tier 0 being the minimum state for releasing it to the persistent universe. They also have a tool to help calculate the estimated duration for getting these completed, breaking them down into each task, which then estimates a total time for what needs to be done. Now, they did mention on Star Citizen Live to ignore the numbers here. These are not the final numbers or anywhere close to what it's going to be. It won't take 8 years to complete these underground facilities. They just haven't tweaked the numbers appropriately just yet. They were just getting everything into the tool to then figure it out. So ignore the timescale. But right now it's in the editor and they are fleshing out the rooms, getting the overlays in and bringing some variety to each location. And as Jared states, they are currently working on 93 rooms with 196 overlay variations, and these will be placed throughout Stanton and Pyro. So there is still a long way to go to get this done, but it's very interesting to see the scale at which they are going to with these underground facilities. From where we are now, and how small and just minuscule they are really, to where they're wanting to get to with all the various types. We have only seen this bearing manufacturing plant, but there will be many more of varying themes planned, and I'm sure that we will continue to check in on its progress over the next few months, maybe even checking out some of the other types, and hopefully even seeing a Tier 0 of one in the verse a little sooner. Now, next up, we had an update on the current Gen 12 renderer conversion progress. Now, Gen 12 is basically a complete redesign of the old rendering architecture that decreases CPU submission time massively and is replacing the current DirectX 11. They say the end goal of Gen 12 is to make use of Vulkan, which will boost performance even more and allow for upscaling, ray tracing, VR, Linux support and much more. And he says that after a year of work, rewriting every graphics feature and ensuring that it's running smoothly on this new architecture, it is now complete. In 3.17 right now, certain aspects of Star Citizen are running in DirectX 11 and others are using Gen 12, so it's a bit of a mix, meaning that most of the code is running in Legacy. But he says hopefully coming in Alpha 3.18 is the completed Gen 12 renderer. Right now they are just fixing the last few things, but do keep in mind that if it does come in 3.18, it will be the It Just Works version of Gen 12. They have not yet started optimizing it, so do expect huge improvements with the next few patches until they can start using Vulkan, which is pretty exciting to hear. So we showed a scene in Orison where it's showing over 47,000 API calls per frame while running in Legacy mode, and then as soon as he switched to Gen 12, the API calls dropped to 33,000, which is significantly less for rendering the exact same scene. Now, it does also show how the scene no longer needs to wait for the render thread. As with Gen 12, the render thread for every scene completes its task much faster, no longer holding up the main thread, which means more FPS so long as we are not GPU bound. Now, he did say to set expectations, the benefits we all see will not be even or equal across the board. It is very dependable on what hardware each of us are running on our PCs. Gen 12 primarily boosts CPU performance, so if you have a weak GPU or play in a very high resolution, then your game will likely be GPU bound, and you will not see so much of a benefit. But I think it's pretty safe to say that the vast majority of us will see a benefit here. So, what's next, he says? When they are fully done with the Gen 12 conversion, and they can properly run Vulkan, there will still be a lot of optimizations they want to do, likely completely removing the render thread, and employing a fully multi-threaded rendering approach, doing async compute and much more. And they are actually developing Vulkan in parallel right now, so once Gen 12 is fully working, it won't take long to get Vulkan in our hands. So there you go, a great episode talking about two very interesting areas of Star Citizen currently in development. Firstly, I am very excited to see these underground facilities come to the PU in all manner of locations and types and styles, as they will provide not only some very unique locations for missions, but also provide something to add intrigue and wonder to the landscape. But more importantly for me personally, hearing that the Gen 12 renderer is now complete and coming with 318, fingers crossed, hopefully providing the vast majority of us with even more performance increases, but also not even optimized yet. So there is certainly more optimizations to come, but mostly allowing them to utilize Vulkan and all that can provide. So it was certainly great to hear about all this, even if it was just mostly graphs and data. I think they did a good job of putting it across in a easy to understand way. So really enjoyed this week's episode, and I look forward to next week's episode, as it is finally the episode where they will show off and talk about the cargo refactor, letting us know what to expect with the first iteration of this massive overhaul. Can't wait to see what it means for 318 and the future of cargo hauling going forwards. Plus updating us on the Rastar tool, which is what they are using to place all of the planetary outposts and buildings for Stanton and Pyro, and eventually in the long run it'll also be the tool in some fashion that we the players use to build our own homesteads. So it should be a really interesting show next week. With that said though, let us get on to Star Citizen Live. So Star Citizen Live this week was with members of the Mission Features team, talking further about the investigation missions which we heard about during CitizenCon, and more on what we can expect from these, but also the plans for missions in general. Now these investigation missions move away from combat and cargo, and try to move to gameplay more to a mindful experience requiring thinking and processing. With Star Citizen's persistent universe, they have spent a lot of time trying to build modular missions, which can scale and provide as much variety as possible, keeping repetition to a minimum, but the issue with this is that it also reduces the potential for narratively or story-driven missions. So this is their way of trying to build something modular, while simultaneously injecting heavy amounts of story to try and bring the persistent universe to life. Now this has always been a difficult task for the missions team, as they either build quick scalable missions that allow for variety so players have enough to do, or they spend more time building missions that are story driven that once complete you won't really want to do again for a while because you've already done it. So it'll be very interesting to see if they can pull this off and create enough of these missions so that we can continue playing and finding things to do. Now they chose investigation missions because the tech for it is kind of already there, so they didn't need to request too much work from the other teams, so they can just take this stuff and push it further. It also creates gameplay which is a contrast to the majority of the missions that we currently have, as they say, stepping away from the norm of combat, trading, mining, and it's just interesting in general to work something out for yourself using clues, finding facts and so forth. Plus, they can scale back the hand-holding with investigation missions to let players find their own way. But don't worry though, they do have a huge list of mission types that they want to do, but they are just focusing on investigation right now for the reasons stated above. But that's not to say that all we're going to get are these investigation missions. There are other devs in this team working on other missions at the same time, which we will speak about very shortly. Now, one of the questions was, is this a new career path? Is there a potential to become a sort of investigator in the game, pursuing this as a full character profession? And he says, right now, or for the initial drop, it's more going to be just a happy diversion rather than a full career path, as with these missions requiring narrative to create the story, you will eventually run into the same story. But they are hoping that creating these and making them modular, then the system that they create will allow them to continuously pump out new content regularly that will hopefully satisfy the PI lifestyle. Now, I do personally think, obviously early on, as they are developing these missions and the tools to help make them modular, there will certainly not be enough of them for players to permanently maintain a PI career path, but I do expect over time, when more and more of these missions have been developed, and the tools to make them modular are done, then I can certainly see this being something that you could pursue, provided you don't mind travelling a bit, maybe having to go from one planet to another. We will see, but I do like the idea of getting these in now so that we can see how they work. Now, when it comes to difficulty and hand-holding, they spoke a little bit more about where their intentions lie, and they are trying to get to the point where they hold the player's hand a lot less. Siege of Orison was the first time that we saw this, as they wanted to just put everyone into a sandbox with some tools to help along the way, but ultimately allowing us to decide how we achieve the goal. So they spent a lot of time honing that mission from patch to patch and created what they wanted. Now, for the investigation missions, it would be a big disservice to the player and this as a career path if they were just to help us out at every step of the way, just providing us with the answer. For these missions, we will get a marker to tell us where the mission is, so we go to that location, but then once we get there, we need to figure out for ourselves what has happened by searching for clues and just making a decision on what has happened and what you need to do. This is also to bring in a bit of a skill element into these missions, like for example, combat. Everyone has a point or a natural skill level where they are just not able to get any better or proceed based on wherever they are in terms of ability. And that should be part of the investigation missions as well. So every player has strengths and weaknesses in all areas, and you might meet someone who is the best bounty hunter but failed miserably at investigation missions, whereas you are really good at deducting what the outcome could be, but in terms of FPS, not so much. Now, this will certainly be up for debate about whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing, and personally speaking, it is one of the aspects of Star Citizen that I love. If there is something that I am just unable to do well, I will find someone or hire someone to do it for me. Or maybe someone might call on me and offer me some credits to do some things that they can't do or they're not very good at. Now, that said, of course, some people just won't have the time to fully hone their skill or get the necessary experience required to do something because of how much playtime we each have being different. So I certainly do think it's going to be vital to have missions and jobs of all types for all skill levels so everyone has something to do all the time while rewarding others who have spent the time training themselves up. So I think it is just a case of building up a good variety and range of missions for everybody. But in some circumstances, I do like the idea that if I take on a mission and then I find that it is just too hard for me to do it alone, and I have to either get out of there, get some more practice, or find help from an NPC or another player, then I like that idea. But when it comes to markers and hand-holding, they are wanting to phase out these UI markers a lot more. But right now, with the lack of a good radar or a good map system, for example, this means markers are currently needed, which I do agree with, but once they do come along, once we have a map where we can place markers and we can use a radar or a scanner, then I am more than happy for them to reduce them. Now, for 3.18, there are some new missions coming in that will make use of the Siege of Orison floating platforms, as we know, and these missions were made by a relatively new developer, so kind of like an onboarding process for this guy who came on board while they were making Siege of Orison. So they have him taking these existing modular missions and just expanding them to the Siege of Orison Islands. And for these missions, they have built them to work well for players who want to work together and be organised, but that's not to say you can't just do it on your own. You can approach these missions how you want, for example, taking the shuttle as normal, or taking your own ship and landing on the ground, on the roof, and working your way down. Again, just creating a sandbox environment for us to choose how we go about the mission. Also for 3.18, as we know, Korea has had a lot of work done there, and there are big changes coming to criminality and crime stats, and as we will probably see, Korea will come back to being a bit of a PvP hotspot again. They are very interested in seeing our feedback and what this does for the persistent universe, and they will be grabbing a lot of data and monitoring the feedback to see how it goes. But Korea is a very systemic location now that can be triggered by players, but they've been wanting to rebalance the law and crime system for a while now, and kind of how much they reward criminals and how difficult it should be to remove your crime stat and so on. Now, I'm really intrigued and looking forward to seeing just how these changes affect the persistent universe for 3.18 and onwards. Being able to land and pay a fine for a crime stat 1 or 2, or even just using the terminal to surrender, which will reduce your prison sentence, I feel will incentivize more players to serve time in prison. And along with the improvements to prisons, providing more missions and fun to be had, rather than thinking it's game over, I'll log out and come back, which is obviously not an ideal game mechanic. Prisons need to be punishing, but not to the point where you're like, what's the point? So I do think it'll be a great step in the right direction to creating that whole ecosystem for crime and prisons, but it's definitely not going to be complete and will still need to be balanced. Now, they actually said that there is a couple of other missions that they're hoping to get in, but they want to make sure that they are all working good. This also takes place on one of the Siege of Orison Islands, requiring players to do multiple things to complete the mission. But there is no guarantees at this time whether they can get that in, but they're hoping to. Now, we actually got to see a little demonstration on a new sort of mission to escape from prison, but also wipe your crime stat, which is a spoiler, I suppose, if you don't want to know what this is or how it works and you would rather just do that in the persistent universe when 318 comes along, then by all means do look away now. But this will be involving a mission from Ruto, and after getting to a black spot in the prison, so going deep enough into the caverns, he will send you a mission to escape, and then once you get to where you need to be, you can then send him data from a derelict on Aberdeen, allowing you to get to a ship and escape while removing your crime stat. So, pretty great that you can actually now properly get rid of your crime stat once you've escaped and get off world. But I also learned during this whole talk that the deeper you go into the prison caves, the better minables you can find, which will reduce your crime stat quicker. Plus, we also got to see NPCs wandering around who have loot on them, but of course if you do kill them, you will increase your sentence. Plus, they have also added an ASOP terminal to Barton Flats, which is the closest location to Aberdeen, so that you can go there and request a ship to get away. So some really good improvements there already. Again, just changing the prison gameplay. Now, the second part of the show was just chatting with the chap who spoke about the underground facilities on Inside Star Citizen, having a bit of a casual chat about who he is, how he got into the business, and how he got working for CIG. Interesting to hear more about another developer, which is always great to check in on. So if you do want to learn more about who this guy is, then I highly suggest watching this video. So we have finally got a date for the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo, which kicks off on November the 18th, and it does look like it's going to be a pretty epic event. We have a sort of sneak peek of some ships expected to be shown off, which I will speak about in a bit, plus some upcoming ships that we've been waiting for and watching come to fruition for some time now. Firstly, this year's event is being held at New Babbage again, which is definitely a good decision, as 3.17.4 won't have the Gen 12 optimizations, so chances are Orison will be a bit of a slideshow, so great to be back at New Babbage, and is actually sponsored by Drake Interplanetary, with a special guest being Andon Arden, who is the CEO of Drake, who looks to be revealing a brand new ship. So, as we have seen in the trailer, both the Drake Vulture and Corsair will be in the halls, but I believe only the Corsair is actually flyable, as we know that this will be releasing in 3.17.4, with the Vulture coming in 3.18, alongside hull stripping. We also spotted a Pisces in red and white, which is likely this medical variant that we've been hearing about, but the event itself kicks off on November 18th and lasts until November the 30th, with each manufacturer presenting their ships throughout that period, beginning with Drake. And each day you will be able to check out all of the many ships that are on display and even rent them all for free for the duration. There will also be special edition paints and in-game items to pick up to celebrate the event this year. But speaking of the ships and the Pisces to start with, we got to see this potential new medical variant of it, which could be this fan favourite variant that we've been hearing about, and it would make a great sort of ambulance, maybe with a medical bed that can be taken out or folded down because there's not a lot of room in the back, but as a decent ship that the Pisces is, it'll certainly be a lot of use for the medical profession. We also got to see a new Drake ship being introduced by the Drake CEO. People are saying it's the Drake Cutter. I don't know personally. It looks like a medium-sized ship with VTOL capabilities, but beyond that, I have no more ideas. We will have to wait and see. And there will also be the usual free fly going on, so all you'll need to do is just create an account and then you don't need to spend anything. When the date rolls round, you will be able to download the game, try it out for free, and try all the ships for free as well. And I am certainly very excited for this year's event because I will finally get my Corsair, be able to check out my Vulture, plus see what else Drake has in store. But on a sad note, right at the end of the trailer for the IAE, it said in memoriam for Jax McCleary, who, if you don't know, is the presenter of the IAE, kind of a take on Jeremy Clarkson. And last we saw of him was last year when he took In the Expanse to Pyro. So, is he dead? Is the actor just no longer capable of providing the voice for this character, or is there something else happening? No idea, but I'm definitely looking forward to finding out, if not left a little heartbroken. So also this week, Alpha 318 has re-entered Evocati testing for its second patch, being 318B, which is still stress testing persistent entity streaming, but now includes all of the fixes from the initial round of testing, and I will continue to cover its progress through the Evocati wave as and when something pops up. You can already check out the patch notes video for 318B that I will link below in the description. The Galactopedia was updated with new additions for the Tamsa, Branna, Cathcart and Hades systems, always a great read. The roadmap has had its fortnightly update, which I have covered in a separate video, also linked in the description below. And finally, the latest edition of Jump Point is now available to all subscribers. So that brings us to the end of the show. If you do enjoy my content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, I am able to do this thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members. If you appreciate what I do and would like to help make it even better from as little as $1 a month, all of the links are provided below.